Pam Bondi stepped out of the taxi and looked up at the tall hotel building in front of her. The evening air was cool and the city lights sparkled around her. She pulled her small suitcase behind her, her steps slow but steady. It had been a long day and all she wanted was a warm shower and a quiet place to rest. Her clothes were simple: blue jeans, a plain white shirt, and a light jacket. She didn't wear makeup that day, and her hair was tied loosely at the back. She looked like any other tired traveler passing through the city. As she walked into the grand hotel lobby, she couldn't help but notice how beautiful everything looked. The marble floors shone under the golden lights and soft music played in the background. At the front desk, 2 receptionists were busy checking in a group of well-dressed guests. The men wore suits and the women carried designer bags. The staff greeted them warmly, offering big smiles and quick service. Pam waited patiently in line behind them, holding her booking confirmation in her hand. When it was finally her turn, one of the receptionists glanced at her and hesitated for a second before forcing a polite smile. "Yes, ma'am, can I help you?" he asked, his tone lacking the warmth he had shown the previous guests. Pam gave a small smile and handed over her booking papers. "I have a reservation for tonight, under the name Pam Bondi." The receptionist typed on his computer, his expression flat. "Yes, I see it here," he said after a pause. "Just one night, correct?" "Yes, just one," Pam replied softly. He nodded, printed out the check-in form, and handed it to her without much eye contact. Behind him, a young woman working at the counter whispered something to her co-worker and quietly laughed. Pam noticed it but didn't say anything. She just signed the form and waited patiently. When the receptionist handed her the room key, he didn't even offer the usual "enjoy your stay" greeting. Instead, he simply said, "Elevators to your left." Pam thanked him kindly and turned toward the elevator, her suitcase rolling quietly behind her. As she walked away, she could hear faint laughter behind her. It stung a little, but she didn't let it show on her face. The elevator doors closed and Pam sighed softly. She had stayed in many hotels before, but she always believed kindness was the real sign of good service, not luxury or fancy surroundings. Still, she stayed calm. She knew who she was and she didn't need to prove anything. When she entered her room, it was small but clean. She placed her bag on the table and looked out the window at the city lights. It was beautiful but lonely. She thought about how often people judged others just by appearances. Her simple clothes and tired face had made the staff assume she wasn't worth their attention. But Pam didn't hold any grudge. She just wished people could see beyond what meets the eye. She changed into comfortable clothes, ordered a cup of tea from room service, and sat quietly on the edge of the bed. When the tea arrived, the young man who brought it barely looked at her. He placed the tray on the table and left quickly without a word. Pam smiled faintly and whispered to herself, "Some lessons are best learned the hard way." The next morning, she went downstairs for breakfast. The restaurant was busy, filled with guests dressed neatly, talking loudly and enjoying their meals. Pam chose a small table in the corner and sat down quietly. A waiter came by, and when she asked for the breakfast menu, he looked at her for a moment as if judging whether she could afford it. Then he handed her the menu without saying a word. Pam looked around. The staff were friendly to other guests, smiling, chatting, and serving quickly. But with her, they seemed distant, impatient, almost cold. She didn't complain or show any irritation. She simply ordered a simple breakfast and waited. While she waited, she overheard 2 waiters standing near the counter whispering and laughing softly. "She looks like she just walked in from the bus station," one of them joked. "Probably got a discount voucher." Pam heard every word, but she stayed calm. She sipped her water, her eyes fixed on the morning sunlight coming through the window. Inside, she felt a quiet sadness. Not because of the rude comments, but because she knew how often people are treated this way in real life. Judged, underestimated, and dismissed just because they don't look rich or powerful. When her food arrived, she thanked the waiter warmly. He didn't even respond, just placed the plate and walked away. Pam smiled politely and began to eat. The food was good, but it couldn't hide the bitterness of how she was being treated. After finishing her meal, she placed a generous tip on the table, more than most guests would leave, and walked out quietly. The waiter came to clear her table and froze when he saw the money. He looked up, confused, as if trying to understand why she had been so kind after being treated so poorly. Pam went back to her room, packed her things, and got ready to leave for her next meeting. She stood by the mirror, fixing her hair neatly this time. Her plain clothes from last night were replaced with a smart professional suit. Her posture changed too, straight, confident, composed. Before leaving, she looked around the room one last time. She smiled softly and whispered, "Let's see if people still laugh when they know the truth." When she stepped out into the hallway, a few hotel staff members walked past her and didn't even recognize her at first. The same receptionist from the night before glanced up from his desk and did a double take. His eyes widened slightly. Pam smiled politely and nodded at him before walking past. Outside, a black car was waiting. The driver quickly stepped out and opened the door for her. As she got in, the doorman who had ignored her the previous evening suddenly looked curious. Who was this woman being picked up by a private car? Inside the car, Pam opened her laptop and went through her notes. The heading on the screen read, "Hotel Staff Evaluation Report." She had been traveling across the country for weeks, visiting different hotels as an undercover consultant for the hotel's corporate management. Her job was to experience the service as a regular guest and report on how staff treated people without titles, wealth, or influence. She didn't tell anyone who she was when she checked in. She wanted to see the truth of how people behave when they think no one important is watching. And now, after what she had seen and heard in this hotel, she had plenty to write about. That evening, she returned to the hotel for a meeting scheduled by the management team. The general manager had been informed that an evaluator would be visiting, but he didn't know who it was. He assumed it would be someone in a fancy suit walking in with authority. He had no idea it was the same woman his staff had mocked just a day earlier. When Pam walked into the lobby this time, everyone looked at her differently. Her appearance had changed completely. Her suit was elegant, her hair was neatly styled, and her confidence filled the room. The receptionist who had ignored her before straightened up quickly and greeted her nervously. "Good evening, ma'am. How may I help you today?" Pam smiled kindly and replied, "I have a meeting with your general manager." "Yes, of course," he said quickly, dialing the phone. His tone was now full of respect and politeness. As he waited for the manager to respond, he couldn't help but feel uneasy. There was something familiar about her, but he couldn't place it. Moments later, the manager came rushing out, smiling broadly. "Ah, you must be Miss Bondi. Welcome, welcome. We've been expecting you." Pam nodded politely. "Thank you," she said softly, glancing at the staff nearby who had mocked her before. Their faces went pale as realization slowly dawned on them. They watched silently as the manager led her to the meeting room. The air in the lobby felt heavier now, filled with guilt and embarrassment. The same people who laughed behind her back were now whispering to each other for a different reason. Pam walked gracefully beside the manager, her calm expression hiding the storm of emotions inside her. She wasn't angry. She wasn't here to humiliate anyone. She was here to teach a lesson about kindness, respect, and how the way you treat people reveals who you truly are. As the door closed behind her, the staff exchanged uneasy looks. They couldn't believe it. The woman they had mocked had turned out to be someone important, someone powerful enough to change their careers with just one report. And that was only the beginning. Pam sat across from the hotel's general manager in a private meeting room. The table was neatly arranged with bottled water, notepads, and pens. The manager looked nervous but tried to appear confident. "We are very honored to have you here, Ms. Bondi," he said with a smile that seemed just a little forced. "Our staff has been informed that an evaluation was happening, but we had no idea you would arrive so early." Pam smiled politely. "That's the point," she said softly. "When people don't know they're being watched, they show their true behavior." The manager nodded quickly, unsure of what to say. He could sense that this meeting might not be just a friendly visit. Pam opened her notebook and glanced through her notes. Her handwriting was neat, each line filled with small but important observations. "I spent one night here," she began calmly. "I checked in around 8 last evening. The staff at the front desk didn't seem very interested in helping me. They were polite, but only because they had to be. Their tone was cold, their body language distant, and there were a few moments when I heard laughter that wasn't exactly professional." The manager's smile faded. He swallowed hard. I see. I'm very sorry to hear that," he said quickly. "Sometimes our team has long shifts and—" Pam raised her hand slightly, stopping him mid-sentence. "I understand." Everyone has long days, but tiredness doesn't justify unkindness. Her words were calm but firm, and they carried a quiet power. The manager nodded slowly, his eyes shifting toward the notepad as if afraid of what she might say next. Pam continued, describing the way she had been treated at the restaurant. The waiter barely made eye contact. 2 staff members whispered and laughed about me, and the next morning I could feel the same energy, like I didn't belong here. The manager sighed deeply. I promise you, Ms. Bondi, this is not how we want our guests to feel. I'll make sure it's corrected immediately. Pam gave a small nod. Good. I believe in giving people a chance to grow, but it's important that your staff learns that every guest matters. Whether someone comes in wearing a suit or old jeans, they deserve the same respect. The manager agreed quickly. Absolutely, ma'am. After the meeting, Pam thanked him for his time and asked if she could observe the staff for the day, without anyone being told who she really was. The manager agreed nervously, not wanting to upset her. Pam spent the next few hours quietly walking around the hotel. She sat in the lobby for a while, watching how the workers interacted with guests. She noticed small things: a bellboy smiling kindly at a family with kids, a cleaner politely helping an elderly woman find her way to the elevator, and a concierge giving clear directions with patience. Not everyone was unkind, she thought. Some people truly cared, and that gave her hope. Around lunchtime, she walked into the restaurant again. The same waiter who had served her the previous morning spotted her. He froze for a moment, eyes wide, realizing she wasn't just another guest. She smiled kindly at him, and he quickly rushed over. Good afternoon, ma'am. It's nice to see you again, he stammered. Pam nodded. Good afternoon. May I have the same table as yesterday? He hesitated for a moment, then nodded quickly. Of course, right this way. As she sat down, she could feel the tension in the air. The same workers who had laughed about her before now whispered nervously to each other. They looked uneasy, unsure what she might say or do. Pam ordered a simple meal again. This time the service was completely different. The waiter was overly polite, offering to refill her glass every few minutes. The kitchen staff worked quietly, and the manager even came by to ask if everything was fine. It was clear everyone was walking on eggshells. But Pam didn't want fear. She wanted understanding. When her food arrived, she smiled and said gently, You don't have to be perfect because I'm here. You just have to be kind. That's all guests really need. The waiter nodded, his voice soft. I'm truly sorry for yesterday, ma'am. I didn't mean to be rude. Sometimes we forget that everyone we serve deserves respect. Pam smiled warmly. That's good you realize it. Mistakes happen. What matters is what you learn from them. Her tone was forgiving, not harsh. She knew that scolding people rarely changed hearts. It was kindness that did. Later that afternoon, she met with a few other employees in a small lounge area. Some looked guilty, others nervous. Pam invited them to sit down and talk openly. Tell me, she said gently, what makes it hard to treat every guest equally? There was silence at first. Then one young receptionist spoke hesitantly. Sometimes we judge people too quickly, she admitted. When someone looks rich or important, we think they deserve better service. When someone doesn't, we just don't try as hard. Another worker added, It's not right, I know, but it becomes a habit. We forget that anyone could be somebody special. Pam nodded slowly. That's true. But the problem isn't just how you treat important people. It's how you treat everyone else. The way you behave when no one is watching, that's what defines who you really are. Her words struck something deep in them. A few employees lowered their eyes, clearly feeling ashamed. Pam then told them a short story from her own life. She explained how, years ago, she had been treated poorly at a small cafe because she looked tired and worn out after a long day. The waitress was rude and I left feeling small, she said quietly. I promised myself that if I ever worked in a place that served people, I'd never make anyone feel that way. The room was silent. The staff listened closely, realizing she wasn't there to punish them. She was there to remind them of something they had forgotten. By evening, Pam's visit had already become the talk of the entire hotel. Some employees whispered about her background. Others Googled her name, realizing she was a well-known consultant who worked with big hotel brands to improve customer care. When she came down to the lobby later that night, everything felt different. The doorman greeted her with genuine warmth. The receptionist smiled sincerely. Even the same worker who had ignored her during check-in gave her a small wave. Pam noticed the change and it made her smile. Sometimes people just needed a small wake-up call to remember what really matters. Before heading to her room, she walked to the front desk. The young woman who had whispered and laughed the night before was standing there. Her hands trembled slightly as she looked at Pam. "Ms. Bondi," she said softly, "I'm really sorry for how I behaved. I shouldn't have done that. It was disrespectful." Pam looked at her gently. "Thank you for saying that. I know it's not easy to admit mistakes." The young woman nodded, her eyes glassy with emotion. "I promise I'll do better." Pam smiled kindly. "That's all I ask." That night, Pam wrote her report in her room. She noted both the negative and the positive things she had seen. Her tone was fair and balanced. She mentioned the rude behavior, but she also highlighted the sincere efforts made after the truth was revealed. She wanted the management to learn, not to fire people out of fear. As she closed her notebook, she looked out the window at the city lights again. She thought about how quickly people's behavior had changed once they realized who she was. But the real test, she knew, would be what they did after she left. The next morning, before checking out, she went to the restaurant one last time. The same waiter greeted her with a warm smile and asked if she'd like her usual breakfast. Pam laughed softly. "You remembered," she said. He nodded. "I'll make sure it's perfect this time." As she ate, the staff moved around quietly, treating every guest with equal care. There were no whispers, no laughter at anyone's expense, just genuine service. It was as if the entire place had woken up from a deep sleep. When she finished her meal, she stood up and looked around the room. She could feel eyes following her, not out of fear anymore, but respect. As she left the restaurant, she thought to herself, maybe change doesn't start with grand speeches or strict rules. Maybe it starts with a single reminder that everyone deserves kindness. Outside the hotel, her driver opened the car door for her. She looked back once more, smiling softly. The same building that had felt cold and judgmental just a day earlier now seemed warmer, filled with a new energy. As the car drove away, Pam whispered quietly to herself, "Sometimes you have to let people see their reflection before they realize how they look." What she didn't know was that her visit would soon become a turning point for that hotel. Staff would talk about her story for years, using it as a reminder of what true hospitality really means. And that was only the beginning of the lesson she came to teach. The next morning began like any other day at the hotel, but something in the air felt different. The employees moved with extra care, their voices quieter, their smiles more genuine. Word had spread through every department about who Pam really was. Some were nervous, others curious, but almost everyone felt a little embarrassed when they remembered how they had treated her just days ago. Pam, however, wasn't there to make anyone feel small. She woke up early, drank her tea by the window, and thought about the conversations she'd had the previous day. She had seen both sides of the staff, the cold, careless one and the kind, sincere one that appeared later. Now she wanted to see which one was real. By mid-morning, she went down to the lobby again. The front desk looked busy. A few guests stood in line, some smiling, some impatient. Pam quietly stepped aside and watched. The young woman who had laughed at her before was now greeting each guest with warmth. She smiled genuinely, used polite words, and even helped an elderly man find his luggage. Pam could tell her change wasn't just out of fear. It was real. Pam sat on one of the couches nearby and opened her notebook. She wrote down a few notes, then looked around again. A family walked in, parents with 2 small kids who looked tired after a long trip. Their clothes were dusty and their voices were soft. The receptionist didn't judge them this time. She smiled, offered them water, and helped them check in quickly. Pam watched with quiet satisfaction. It was small, but it was progress. After a few minutes, the general manager spotted her from across the lobby and hurried over. "Good morning, Ms. Bondi," he said politely, his tone respectful. "I hope you had a comfortable night." "I did, thank you," Pam said with a kind smile. "The service already feels better." He nodded quickly. "We had a small meeting with the staff last night. I reminded everyone that every guest deserves kindness no matter what. I think your presence made them realize it more deeply than any speech I could have given." Pam smiled softly. "Sometimes experience teaches what words can't." The manager nodded again, relief washing over his face. "Would you like to see our service areas today? Maybe talk to more of our team?" Pam agreed. Together they walked through the hotel, the housekeeping department, the kitchen, the maintenance area. Everywhere they went, workers greeted her with nervous but respectful smiles. Some thanked her quietly for visiting. Others just looked at her with admiration. In the housekeeping section, an older woman approached Pam shyly. "Ma'am," she said in a low voice, "I just want to say thank you. People forget how powerful kindness is. What you said yesterday, it made many of us think about our own actions." Pam placed a gentle hand on her arm and smiled. "That means a lot to me. You're the heart of this place. Never forget that." The woman smiled back with watery eyes. After finishing the staff visits, Pam went back to her room to rest for a bit. She sat by the window again, the sunlight falling softly across her notebook. She thought about how fast people could change when they were reminded of what really matters. But she also knew that sometimes change fades once the pressure is gone. She wanted this one to last. Later in the afternoon, she received a call from the hotel's corporate office. The senior director wanted to join her for the evening meeting with the staff. He said he'd heard good things about her report so far and wanted to personally thank her for the work she was doing. Pam agreed, knowing it would be the perfect opportunity to show the staff that respect and humility reach much higher than they thought. Around 6 p.m., the hotel's conference room started filling up. The staff looked nervous again, whispering among themselves. They didn't know what to expect. Some thought people might lose their jobs. Others feared strict rules or punishment. The general manager stood near the front, straightening his tie and checking his notes repeatedly. When Pam walked in, the room went silent. Everyone's eyes followed her. This time she looked calm and confident, dressed neatly, her notebook in hand. She greeted everyone with a warm smile and said softly, "Good evening, everyone." A few staff members replied quietly. Others stayed still. Pam walked to the front and looked around the room. "I know you've all heard a lot about me in the past 2 days," she said gently. "And I know some of you probably feel uncomfortable about what happened when I first arrived. But I didn't come here to embarrass anyone. I came here to remind us all what hospitality really means." The room stayed quiet. Everyone listened closely. "When I checked in," Pam continued, "I didn't look like someone important. I wasn't wearing fancy clothes and I was tired. But that shouldn't have mattered. Every guest who walks through your doors has a story. Some come for vacations, some for business, and some are just trying to find a bit of peace in a busy world. Your kindness or your lack of it can change their whole day." She paused for a moment, letting her words sink in. The faces in the crowd softened. "I've seen good things here," she said with a smile. "I saw your staff helping families, being patient and working hard. You have the right heart. You just forgot for a moment how important your job really is. You don't just serve food or carry bags, you make people feel seen and valued." One of the waiters who had mocked her earlier raised his hand nervously. "Ma'am, I want to say something." Pam nodded encouragingly. He stood up, his voice trembling slightly. "I was one of the people who didn't treat you right when you came in. I judged you because of how you looked, and now I feel ashamed. I realize that sometimes we let pride or tiredness make us cold. I'm really sorry for that." Pam's eyes softened. "Thank you for your honesty," she said warmly. "It takes courage to admit mistakes. What matters now is that you use this lesson to make others feel welcome." He nodded, visibly emotional. A few others murmured in agreement. Then the door opened and the corporate director entered, a tall man in a crisp suit with an easy smile. Everyone straightened up immediately. The manager greeted him and he walked over to Pam, shaking her hand. "It's a pleasure to meet you in person, Ms. Bondi," he said. "I've been reading your evaluations for years, and I must say, this one might be your most impactful visit yet." Pam smiled modestly. "It's not about my report. It's about the people who chose to change after realizing their mistakes." The director nodded and turned to address the staff. "What Ms. Bondi experienced here is something every hotel faces at some point. We all get busy. We all forget the heart of this business, treating people with dignity. But the way you've reacted, the way you've tried to make things right, that's what makes this hotel worth investing in." The staff looked relieved, some even smiling again. Pam spoke once more, her tone soft but full of meaning. "Respect is free. It costs nothing, but it changes everything. When you treat someone with kindness, they remember it forever. You don't know who they are, what they carry, or what they've been through. But your kindness might be the best part of their day. There was silence for a few seconds, then quiet applause began to fill the room. It wasn't loud or forced, it was sincere. Some clapped while nodding, others smiled with tears in their eyes. Pam felt a warmth in her chest. She knew this moment would stay with them longer than any policy memo or training session ever could. After the meeting, several staff members came up to thank her personally. One young man said softly, "I joined this job because I wanted to make people happy, but over time I forgot that. You reminded me why I started." Pam smiled and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then my visit was worth it." As the crowd slowly left, the manager approached her again. "I can't thank you enough," he said sincerely. "You didn't just help our hotel, you helped our people." Pam smiled gently. "That's the goal. A good hotel isn't built on luxury. It's built on hearts that care." That night, as she returned to her room, she felt a deep sense of peace. She knew she had done her part. She packed her suitcase quietly, folding each item carefully. Before closing her notebook, she wrote one last line at the bottom of her report. "True hospitality begins when judgment ends." The next morning, she checked out early. The same receptionist who once treated her coldly now greeted her warmly, thanking her for staying with them. Pam smiled kindly. "You've all done well," she said. "Keep that kindness alive. Don't let it fade." As she walked out into the morning light, the staff at the entrance stood together waving goodbye. Their smiles were real this time, not out of duty but out of gratitude. Pam stepped into her car, looking back one last time. The hotel looked brighter now, not because of the lights, but because of the change within. She leaned back in her seat and whispered, "Sometimes the best way to teach kindness is to let people see themselves through someone else's eyes." And as the car drove away, she knew her work there was done. But the story of what happened inside that hotel was just beginning to travel far beyond its walls. The next morning, the atmosphere in the hotel was completely different from the day before. Everyone was running around, polishing tables, checking uniforms, fixing their hair, and whispering nervously to one another. The manager had announced early in the morning that some executives from the hotel's parent company were coming for an inspection. It was a big deal. The staff knew how serious these visits could be. People could lose their jobs if things went wrong. Down in the lobby, Pam stood quietly near a plant, watching everything unfold. She was dressed differently today. Gone were the plain jeans and simple blouse she had worn before. Now she looked sharp and confident. A neat navy blue suit, clean shoes, and a small folder in her hand. Her calm, steady presence made her look like someone important. Some of the same workers who had laughed at her earlier now glanced her way but didn't recognize her at first. One whispered to another, "Who's she? Must be part of the visiting team." The other nodded nervously, pretending to agree. They both had no idea they were about to find out who she really was. A few minutes later, a sleek black car pulled up to the hotel entrance. The manager straightened his tie, wiped the sweat from his forehead, and hurried to the door. Several people stepped out, senior executives in crisp suits. They looked serious, but one of them broke into a smile as soon as he saw Pam standing inside. "Good morning, Pam," he said warmly, shaking her hand with both of his. "Glad to see you again." The staff froze. The same two workers who had whispered earlier now stared, wide-eyed. The manager blinked in surprise and quickly greeted her with a nervous smile. It was clear now that Pam wasn't just another guest. The executives walked with her into the lounge area, chatting casually. Everyone nearby tried to eavesdrop. Bits of conversation floated around, words like evaluation, training, and report. The realization began to sink in among the workers. Pam wasn't an ordinary guest. She was someone with power, maybe even someone who could decide their future. Within the hour, everyone was called into the large conference room on the first floor. The room, normally used for events, was now filled with hotel staff, receptionists, waiters, cleaners, and managers all standing quietly in rows. The executives sat at the front, with Pam in the center. The manager stepped forward first, his voice trembling slightly as he spoke into the microphone. "Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming on such short notice. As you know, we have some special guests today from the company headquarters. They've come to discuss our performance and future goals. But before that, I'd like to introduce someone important. Please welcome Ms. Pam Bondi." The name echoed through the room. A few people clapped awkwardly, unsure of who she really was. Pam smiled kindly and stood up. She didn't look angry or proud, just calm and confident. Thank you, she began, her voice soft but steady. I'm sure most of you didn't know who I was when I arrived here a couple of days ago. That was the point. The room grew still. Everyone listened carefully. I wasn't here as an executive, she continued. I came as a regular guest. I wanted to experience your hotel the way any ordinary person would. No titles, no introductions. Just me, a tired traveler with a reservation. Some people exchanged nervous glances. A few looked down at their shoes, already realizing where this was going. Pam opened her folder and looked around the room. During my stay, I observed everything. How guests were treated, how staff interacted, how the environment felt. Some of you were kind, patient, and welcoming, and I want to thank you for that, but I also saw something that worried me. She paused for a moment, letting her words settle. The tension in the room thickened. I saw judgment, she said quietly. I saw people being treated differently because of how they looked. I heard whispers, laughter, and comments that no guest should ever hear. I felt what it's like to be looked down on, not because of who I am, but because of what people assumed about me. The manager's face turned pale. The two waiters from the restaurant stood frozen, their hands trembling slightly. Everyone else stayed silent. Pam continued, her tone calm but firm. You didn't know who I was. And that's fine. You weren't supposed to. But what matters is how you treat people when you think no one important is watching. That's what defines true hospitality. The room was so quiet that even the hum of the air conditioner sounded loud. Pam looked at the faces in front of her, some filled with regret, some with guilt, some simply stunned. Let me share something, she said softly. When I checked in that first night, I had been traveling for 12 hours. I was exhausted. I just wanted a warm welcome, maybe a smile, maybe someone to ask how my day was. But instead I got cold stares and whispered jokes. Do you know how that feels? To be invisible in a place that's supposed to make you feel cared for? A few heads bowed lower. Pam turned slightly, her gaze shifting toward the restaurant staff. When I came to dinner, I heard laughter, quiet but sharp. I heard people mocking what I wore, assuming I didn't belong. Yet when I left, I still thanked them. I even left a tip because I wanted to believe maybe they were just having a bad day. But that moment stayed with me. Her voice softened even more now. You see, kindness costs nothing. But disrespect, and even in small amounts, can leave a mark that lasts a long time. One of the waiters bit his lip, clearly holding back tears. The manager tried to keep a straight face but failed. His expression showed deep shame. Pam closed her folder and took a slow breath. I'm not here to embarrass anyone, she said gently. I'm here to remind you why you do what you do. Working in hospitality isn't just about serving food or checking people into rooms. It's about making someone's day better, even if you don't know who they are or what they've been through. Her tone was warm now, full of compassion. Every person who walks through those doors could be someone's mother, father, child, or friend. You never know their story. You never know if they're celebrating something or running away from heartbreak. But your words, your attitude, they can make a huge difference. You can make them feel seen. That's what true service means. A few staff members nodded quietly, their faces softening as her words sank in. Pam continued. When people feel respected, they remember. When they feel ignored or judged, they remember that even more. And when that happens in a place like this, it affects not just one guest. It affects the whole reputation of the hotel. She glanced at the executives, who nodded in agreement. This hotel has great potential, she said, turning back to the staff. Beautiful rooms, excellent facilities, a perfect location. But what really matters, what guests truly remember, is how they're treated. She paused again, then smiled faintly. And the good news is you can change that starting today. A faint murmur of relief spread through the room. Pam wasn't here to punish them. She was here to help. I want to share one last thought, she said, her voice calm and kind. When I left my home for this trip, I promised myself I'd stay somewhere that reminded me of warmth and care. I didn't find that at first, but I believe it can exist here. You just need to see every guest, really see them, as a person, not a profile or an outfit. She looked around once more, her eyes meeting those who had mocked her. To those who made mistakes, I forgive you. I truly do. What matters now is that you learn from it. Don't let one poor choice define who you are. Let your kindness define you instead. By the time she finished, several people were wiping tears from their eyes. The room erupted into quiet applause, not because anyone told them to, but because they felt it. The truth, the emotion, and the lesson behind her words. The manager stepped forward, humbled. "Thank you, Ms. Bondi," he said softly. "We needed to hear that. I promise things will change." Pam nodded with a gentle smile. "I believe you," she said, "and I'll be checking back to see how far you've come." As the meeting ended, people slowly walked up to her one by one to apologize. The waiters from the restaurant spoke first, their voices trembling. "We're sorry," one said. "We were wrong. You didn't deserve that." Pam placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "It's okay," she said kindly. "What matters is that you know it now." When she walked out of the conference room, the air felt lighter. People smiled at each other differently, not out of habit but out of understanding. The lesson Pam had shared touched every heart in that building. And though the day wasn't over yet, everyone knew the hotel would never be the same again.